Welcome to Captive and Obedient, the podcast powered by 2 Corinthians 10 and 5. This is the podcast for the mission-minded messenger who has a message, mission, or vision from God. You want to show up in a bigger way in your life, ministry, and business. You want to grow your impact and income. And you value the work of renewing the mind so you can show up in your calling and prosper. Welcome home. I am your host, Kim Springer, certified life and business mindset coach. Grab your Bible and your brain and let's go. Hello, beloved. Welcome to episode number 5. Framing Your Adversary. I've got 2 words for how this episode is going to be. So good. We're about to take some thoughts captive up in here. In episode 4, we talked about unframing God. We talked about the concept of framing, which is when our decisions are influenced by the way information is presented rather than the information itself. We looked at how we were given information about God that caused us to put certain frames around him. And these frames, they limit our knowledge and experience of him. In that episode, you began the process of unframing him because there is no way he can be contained in a frame. And we just looked at one attribute of his omniscience, and it's just mind-blowing. So prayerfully, you began that work of unframing God last week. This week, I'm going to invite you into the process of framing the adversary. Now, this is a 2-part series, and the way it's set up is intentional. Okay, James 4 and 7 says, submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. You cannot effectively resist the devil until you submit to God. Therefore, when we do this work in our thinking to renew our mind about our adversary, we cannot do that effectively if we haven't first submitted to God in our thinking. So do that work first before doing this work in this episode. Let's get into this episode. Now, I believe there is a strange backwardness to this. For the most part, we've been given information that has put a frame around God, but on the other hand, we've been given information that has left the adversary frameless. Even though we know he doesn't have power, we operate from a place that doesn't reflect that. Let's take those thoughts captive today. We're going to look at a few scriptures, not all of them, but a few, and we're going to see how the adversary could be framed according to these scriptures. When the adversary isn't framed up properly according to the word of God, he has power when he actually has none. Let's jump into this. The first thing I want to look at is this thought that I take captive often in my community, in my programs, and it is the devil is busy. You've likely heard this. You may have thought it or said it yourself. Now imagine if there is just one other person with this same thought, the devil is busy. Now I want you to imagine 10 people may have this thought, 100 people, 1,000 people. It's safe to say that a lot of people likely think and believe the devil is busy. All of these people thinking and believing this. And when each person thinks this, they think he is busy in their life. They have so much going on. So much is coming at them. Now, first, he's not omnipresent. He is not present in all places at the same time. He can't be present everywhere at the same time. Yes, he has a network of his demons, but the devil is not busy in everyone's life simultaneously. And I know we say this somewhat unconsciously, but it creates so much harm. We give the adversary like this blanket credit for things with this thought, and we don't even think to question it. When you focus on how busy the adversary is, how are you thinking about God? Because remember, he created him. The enemy is a created thing. God is a creator. And so how are you thinking about God when you're focused on how busy the adversary is? Are you thinking that God's not busy? Are you thinking he's slow moving? You're waiting on him? He may not come when you want him, but he's always on time? All right, now this is captive and obedient, and we take every thought captive. Now, I'm not going to touch that one because that's a precious one, right? He may not come when you want him, but he's always on time. I'm not going to touch that one today. But if you think the devil is busy and God is not, we have to switch those frames. In John chapter 5, after Jesus heals the man that was lame by the pool of Bethesda for 38 years, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him for doing that on the Sabbath. Let's read verse 17. It says, in his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. That was the NIV. I want to read the Passion Translation. It says, Jesus answered his critics by saying, every day my Father is at work, and I will be too. Who is always at his work? Our Heavenly Father and Jesus. So instead of programming your mind with the devil's busy, tell yourself God is busy. He is always at his work. Instead of thinking the devil is busy, put a frame around him. He's limited in what he can do. He cannot be present everywhere at the same time. In episode 4, we talked about God being omniscient. Omniscience is a state of possessing all the knowledge there is, the state of knowing everything. God knows the past, the present, and the future simultaneously. He knows all that there is to know, all that can be known. If we're not careful, we will attribute this characteristic to our adversary. He is not all-knowing. He doesn't know the past, present, and future simultaneously. I want to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 2. I love this chapter. Let's start at verse 4. Paul is speaking here. He says, my message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. We do, however, speak a message of wisdom among the mature, but not the wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. Verse 7. No, we declare God's wisdom, a mystery that has been hidden and that God destined for our glory before time began. Verse 8. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. What does that say? For if they had no knowledge of the future. They had no knowledge of God's plan. The enemy is not all-knowing. So when you default to thinking your circumstances are happening because the devil has some intel about your future, you need to question that thought. Let's look at Jeremiah 29:11. I'm going to read it. Let's see. I'm going to read it in both the NIV, actually about 3 versions here. I got to show you something. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Okay, we all love this verse. We all know it. Let me read this in the Passion Translation. It says, "Here's what Yahweh says to you. I know all about the marvelous destiny I have in store for you. A future planned out in detail. My intention is not to harm you, but to surround you with peace and prosperity and to give you a beautiful future glistening with hope." And then a final translation I want to read here. It says, "I alone know the plans I have for you. Plans to bring you prosperity and not disaster. Plans to bring about the future you hope for." Okay, so this is important. We love this verse and we quote it. But do you know that he's saying, wait a minute, I know the plans? That means I alone know the plans. He knows them. That word plans also can mean thoughts. So he's saying, "For I have known the thoughts that I am thinking towards you." Okay, so we established last week, Psalm 139, that God is thinking quite a bit of thoughts about us. David said, like, if he were to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand on the earth. And that's about over 7 quintillion or 7 sextillion. Like, that's a lot of thoughts. And God is saying, I alone know these thoughts that I'm thinking towards you. I have planned out your future in detail. So tell me, how, just how, does the adversary have access to what God is thinking about you? So when you give him credit, the adversary, when you give the adversary credit for doing something specific or orchestrating a specific circumstance because you think he knows what you're going to do in the future, you are thinking he has access to God's thoughts about you. He doesn't. God alone knows those plans. With this information, what frame could you put around the adversary? How about he isn't all-knowing? Next, we want to look at how we tend to think he's all-powerful. Let's look at really just how much power he has. Because, the way people talk about him, we can think that he is a comparable opponent to God. Let's look at this. After Jesus' resurrection, he appeared to his disciples. I want to read Matthew 28:18. It says, "Then Jesus came to them and said, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me.'" Another version says, "And Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, 'All power is given unto me in heaven and in earth.'" How much power? How much authority? All. And where? Heaven and in earth. So how much is left for Satan? Since Jesus has all, Satan has none. And this is so important to get, that he has no power. Now, power, when you define it, it means the ability to act or produce an effect, often referring to the capacity to control or influence others, or the possession of authority over people or situations. So when I look at this, that Jesus has all power. Therefore, that leaves 0 for Satan. And we can agree that leaves him none. And power means the ability to act, the ability to produce, the ability to do things. The way I frame the adversary is that you have no ability to act. He has no power of his own. Now, we do see evil in the world. So how does he get this power? One way is through his lies. And we're going to talk about this more later. But I want to share this from Dr. Caroline Leaf in her book, Switch on Your Brain. She says that it's through the senses that we receive Satan's lies. But, and this is important, we don't have to believe those lies. If we do believe them, we process them into physical realities through the conscious cognitive to the non-conscious metacognitive. That form the substance of the nerve networks upon which we act. This means that if we listen to and believe the enemy's lies, we actually choose to process them into physical realities inside our brains. In doing so, we create the evil and act upon it, but we do not have to believe Satan's lies. We as humans create evil when we collapse these probabilities into actualities. This is important for us to understand. Satan uses lies. When we believe those lies, we process them into physical realities. But his lies are nothing but probabilities. Okay, now Satan is the father of lies. He is going to come at you. Dr. Leaf says that he comes at you with 1,000 negative probabilities. But you always need to remember that a probability has no power. It only becomes powerful when you believe the lie and collapse the probability into an actuality. Remember, he has 0 power. He has no ability to act or do anything, but he will lie. He will send a lie. And when you believe the lie, you do his doing, what he would want to do. And so this is important to see that believing a lie empowers him. We surrender our power to him. We abdicate the power we have, but he has no power, only the power we give him by believing his lies. Satan is powerless. So what frame can you put around him? I want you to think about someone that is perpetually without power, because he is, right? Forever, eternally, without power. Only the power we give and surrender to him does he have. Now, if you were thinking about a person who was perpetually without power, they have no power to, power their home or their devices, what would they do? They would have to actually steal it from their neighbors. They'd have to steal yours. And how do we view that person that has no power, without power, and is stealing our power? We would see them as a thief. We would see that person as a thief. And so there you have it. There's the frame to put around him. He's a thief. He has no power. And so he deceives us out of ours. And how does he do that? With a lie. All right, now I want to look at 1 Peter 5:8. It says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." We're just going to touch this a little bit because you got to know this verse. He's not a true lion, but he walks around roaring like one. And this is important to see here. It's not the lion that's crouching down or, stealthily creeping towards the foe. But this is actually the raging lion, the one who is roaring to intimidate. That's what that means. Walking around roaring like one. And so what he's using here is intimidation. Intimidation is one of his weapons. And so intimidation means to frighten or to threaten someone, usually in order to persuade them to do something that you want them to do. I want to say that again. To frighten or threaten someone, usually in order to persuade them to do something that you want them to do. Intimidation is what he's using here, because he cannot just willy-nilly walk up into our lives and touch us. He cannot touch those who are kept by the power of God through faith unto salvation. And so he's walking about seeking whom he may devour, those where he can gain the advantage or the foothold. But here's the beautiful thing here. Verse 9 says, resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And so, yes, we have an image of him walking around as this roaring lion, so just using intimidation, but we're told to just resist him, stand firm in the faith. So it's truly letting you know that even with the intimidation, he is powerless. And we just need to resist and stand firm. Now, I'm not going to get into exactly how to do this in this episode. Resisting the devil could be a whole episode by itself, but it's very simple to do. So I'm going to recommend some of my favorite books here. And when I say recommend, I mean 100% you should read it. Like you have to. If you are a listener of Captive and Obedient, you've got to read the books I recommend. They're like required reading. I know I say recommend, but they literally are required reading, because you need to get this in you if you're going to take your thoughts captive. All right, so the first one is, they're both by Watchman Nee. And the first one is titled Resist the Devil. Both books are so good. So the second one is Sit, Walk, Stand. You have got to get both of these books into your life. You are going to renew your mind so good. They're both very short reads. You're going to renew your mind so well about your adversary. Like, they are so good. I mean, they're so good. So, it's a recommendation, but it's actually required reading if you are going to be taking your thoughts captive. And so, resist the devil. He's going to show you exactly what that looks like. Okay? Even when you resist him and he comes back. I mean, Watchman goes into great detail. It is a very short read, though. And you know what? You could probably Google it and find a free PDF online, because a lot of his works, you can find it like that. Okay, so what we want to see here is that his weapons are lies, deception, intimidation, accusations, temptation. Think about that. That's his works. His works are lies, deception, intimidation, accusations, temptation. 1 John 3:8 tells us, for this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. So his works were destroyed. So it makes sense that he uses deception. And that's a frame that you can put around him. I want to share this from Andrew Womack's book. You've already got it. He says, Satan is an absolutely defeated foe. He has zero power to do anything. All he can do is deceive you through wiles, cunningness, craftiness, and lies, and then use the very power you surrender to him against you. Now, I want you to imagine you're lining up for battle, and the battle begins, and your enemy starts throwing lies at you. It's like, Wait a minute. What kind of battle are we in here? You're throwing lies and deceptions and accusations. This is the kind of fight you're in? Yep. This is the kind of battle you're in. We could talk about this forever, but I want to wrap this up with this point, and it's super important. So lean in. In Resist the Devil, Watchman Nee says, all of Satan's works are done under the cover of deceit. I want you to think about that. He disguises his work. I tell my community all the time that the enemy, he isn't coming towards you with a t-shirt on that says, I'm about to deceive you. He is not that blatant. You will not see him coming. His basic work is to camouflage whatever he does so that people don't know that it's him, that it's his doing. 2 Corinthians 11:14 says, and no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. So you have to see that he has a lot of practice in disguising himself. And so it's not going to be blatant. 2 Corinthians 10:4-5 says, for the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but mighty before God to the casting down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that is exalted against the knowledge of God, and bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. The battle against Satan is waged in your thoughts. Now, think about this. He gives you a thought and makes it appear like it's your own. So you don't know it's him. If he were to let you see his hand, that it's really him, you'd automatically resist his thoughts. And he offers us so many thoughts like they are our own. Remember, he does not have this t-shirt on and it's blatant saying, I'm about to give you a lie. I'm about to deceive you. That's the whole point of deception. If you're deceived, you don't know that it's not your thought. Remember what happened in Matthew 16. I want to read that because this is a good example of this. Let's start at verse 21. It says, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Verse 22, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. Verse 23, Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. We're probably thinking, that was very noble of Peter. Like, no, Lord, this will never happen to you. But we see that Satan offered him a thought, and it appeared like it was his own. Watchman says that Satan does not tempt in open warfare. Rather, he hides outside the door behind the wall to sneak in with his temptation. He does everything secretly. Okay, this is where we're going. It took us a little bit to get here, but this is where we're going. We need you to see this. With the lies, with the deception, with him disguising his work, not being blatant, masquerading as an angel of light, he does everything secretly. He never does anything in the light. He has to do everything secretly. Because remember, Jesus was manifested to destroy the works of the devil. His works are destroyed. While here on earth, Jesus cast out every demon he met. He destroyed his works. And check this out. Colossians 2:15 says, and having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Do you know what that means? When you make a public spectacle of someone, it means that someone publicly humiliated and displayed their victory over another person or group. What they did is they put them on display as defeated and powerless for everyone to see. It's like a showy or embarrassing public display where everyone can witness. Triumphing over them, that signified a complete victory or dominance over the other party. And it indicated that the act of public humiliation itself was the means of demonstrating the triumph. And so this is how, when they would conquer their enemies, they would capture them, and they would walk around in a parade in a victory march for everyone to see. Yep, this is the one. This is your adversary. This is your enemy. You no longer have to fear him. And they would parade around, make a very open display of their victory over the enemy. And so there was nothing secret about Jesus' victory over the enemy. It was done in the open for everyone to see. The shame and disgrace. Of course, the enemy is moving around in secret to not be detected. He was publicly humiliated. Everyone witnessed his defeat. This is so important. You have to get the right frame around your adversary. When he comes to shame you privately, remember that he was shamed openly. He is defeated and has zero power. He lies, and then he represents himself as more powerful than he really is. Is he real and a factor? Yes. But he only has the ground you give him. Frame him up according to the word of God, and you will be able to stand your ground as the word says. Now, you may have a lifetime of having the adversary unframed in your mind, like he can do anything at any time, like he has no boundaries, but he does. So you're going to have to receive God's grace as you do this work of framing your adversary. And it's important that you do this work, because we can't take thoughts captive if we don't have the right thoughts about the adversary and about God. Prayerfully, this episode gets you started. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next week. Hey, are you ready to use your mind to prosper in the way God has designed it to? Then I want to give you your first tool that will make this easy for you. This is the tool I use to prime my brain to take thoughts captive. It's a client favorite and the one tool I use the most when coaching my clients. It's my gift to you so you can take control of your thoughts, advance in your calling, and see and experience God's will and best in your life and others. Head over to visioncoachkim.com/tool to watch this on-demand training, or use the link in the show notes. I'll see you there. And remember, you are one captive thought away from your breakthrough.